9 seconds. That's how long it took for the most powerful man in Seoul's underworld to lose every ounce of control he'd spent a lifetime building. Not in a boardroom, not in a negotiation, not with a gun pointed at his chest. It happened over a cup of tea. Kang Do-jin, boss of the Kang Syndicate, controller of 4 districts, owner of 11 legitimate fronts, a man whose name alone could rearrange the seating chart at any banquet in Gangnam, walked into his mistress's mansion on a Tuesday evening, sat down on a velvet couch like he owned the sky above it, and asked for tea. Simple, ordinary, routine. But the woman who walked through that door carrying the tray was not ordinary. She was his ex-wife. The same woman he had signed divorce papers against 9 months and 13 days ago. The same woman whose belongings had been boxed, whose photos had been deleted from every device, whose name had been scrubbed from the Kang family registry like a clerical error. And here's where you need to pause. Do the math with me. 9 months. She vanished 9 months ago, and now she's not just alive, not just in the same city, she is working as a maid in the home of the woman who replaced her. But that's not the part that will break you, because upstairs behind a locked door in the east wing of that very mansion are 3 cribs, 3 identical cribs. If you've already done the math, you understand why this man's hand started shaking. Subscribe to Aurora Love Saga right now, because what happens next in this story is the kind of twist that doesn't just surprise you, it haunts you. So how did the most feared man in Seoul end up sitting 5 meters away from his own blood without knowing it? Let's go back to the beginning. The black Maybach rolled through the gates of a hillside estate in Upper Gangnam like a shadow finding its favorite corner. 2 SUVs flanked it. 4 men in dark suits stepped out first, scanning the perimeter with the kind of practiced stillness that told the world someone important was inside. Kang Do-jin stepped out last. He didn't rush. Men like him never did. He adjusted one cufflink, left wrist, always left first, old habit, and looked up at the mansion like he was appraising real estate, not visiting a woman. And in many ways, that's exactly what this was. Choi Nara had been circling his world for 5 months. Beautiful, connected, daughter of a shipping magnate with ties to 3 port authorities. She was strategic, she was decorative, and she had made it very clear, through curated dinners, perfectly timed appearances at his fundraisers, and a persistence that bordered on choreography, that she wanted to be the woman on Kang Do-jin's arm. The syndicate elders approved of her. They called her clean background, useful foreground, the kind of woman who looked good in photographs and never asked about the rooms she wasn't allowed to enter. The previous woman, Saren, had asked about everything. That had been the problem, or so they believed. Tonight was Nara's audition. She just didn't know she was the one being tested. Do-jin walked through the front door, and every light in the foyer seemed to brighten on cue. Nara appeared at the top of a curved staircase in a cream-colored dress, smile wide, posture rehearsed. "You came," she said, as if she hadn't confirmed with his assistant 4 times. "I said I would." He didn't smile. He didn't compliment the dress. He walked to the sitting room, chose the largest chair, leather, imported, positioned to face both the entrance and the window, and sat down, like a king selecting his temporary throne. Nara followed, heels clicking softly. She poured herself into the seat beside him, close but not too close. She knew the game, or she thought she did. "Can I get you anything?" He loosened one button on his jacket. "Tea." Simple, almost dismissive. Nara turned and called toward the kitchen hallway, a small rehearsed gesture. She wanted him to see that she ran this house smoothly, that she had staff, that she was the kind of woman who managed luxury without wrinkling. But what she didn't manage was what walked through that door next, and that single word, tea, became the first domino in a chain of revelations that would tear open every lie Kang Dojin had believed for the past 9 months. The maid entered quietly, head slightly bowed, black uniform, white apron, hair pulled back tight. She carried the tray with practiced balance. 1 porcelain teapot, 2 cups, a small dish of dried jujubes arranged with the kind of care that spoke of someone who understood Korean tea, etiquette at a bone-deep level. Not trained, raised in it. Nara didn't look up. She was mid-sentence. Something about a gallery opening. Something designed to impress. Dojin wasn't listening because his eyes had drifted, casually, the way a predator scans a room without thinking, toward the maid's hands as she set the tray down, and then upward, to her wrists, her collarbone, the line of her jaw, her face. The air left his lungs like someone had pressed a hand flat against his chest. His fingers, wrapped around the armrest, didn't move, but the leather beneath them groaned softly. That's how hard he gripped. Yoon Saren. Not someone who looked like her, not a resemblance, not a trick of light. Her. The same slightly upturned nose, the same dark eyes that once looked at him like he was the entire universe, and then, at the end, like he was a stranger she wished she'd never met. The same mouth, closed now, pressed into a line so neutral it could have been carved from stone. And there, faint, almost invisible, unless you had once traced it with your thumb at 3 a.m., a small scar at the edge of her left eyebrow from a childhood fall she'd told him about on their second date, the one detail no doppelganger could replicate. She placed the cup in front of him. Steam rose between them, and she did not look up, not once. "Will there be anything else, ma'am?" Her voice, directed at Nara, not at him, was soft, flat, professional. The kind of voice you use when you've trained yourself to feel nothing in a room where everything burns. Nara waved her off. "That's all." Saren turned, walked toward the door, each step measured, each breath invisible. And Dojin, the man who had once made a rival syndicate leader apologize on national television, sat frozen in a velvet chair, watching his ex-wife disappear through a doorway like she was made of smoke. He did not speak for 11 seconds. Nara noticed. "Is everything all right?" "The tea," he said slowly. "Who made it?" "Oh, the maid. She's newish. Quiet, but very precise." "Why?" He picked up the cup, took a sip, his jaw tightened. Barley and chrysanthemum, brewed exactly the way he liked it. The ratio no one else had ever gotten right, because no one else had ever watched him drink tea every morning for 3 years. No one else had stood in their tiny first apartment in Mapo-gu with a kettle that didn't whistle properly, experimenting with proportions until she found the one that made him close his eyes and say, "That one, that's it." She had smiled like she'd won something. He remembered that smile now. It cut deeper than any blade in his collection. He set the cup down carefully, as if it might shatter. No reason. But that was a lie, and the lies Kang Dojin told himself that night were about to become the most expensive ones of his life. Let me take you back, because you need to understand what kind of man Kang Dojin was 9 months ago to understand what he's becoming now. The penthouse had floor-to-ceiling windows facing the Han River. It was beautiful in the way expensive things are, cold, precise, curated. And on the night of November 14th, it became a courtroom. Dojin stood near the window, back turned. His shoulders, wide, rigid, carried the posture of a man who had already made his verdict. Saren sat at the dining table, hands flat on the surface, eyes red but no tears falling. She had stopped crying 2 hours ago, not because the pain stopped, but because something inside her had quietly broken past the point where crying still worked. "The photos don't lie, Saren." His voice was granite, no tremor, no uncertainty. I saw them. Jusiok confirmed the timeline, the hotel, the room. You were there. Hwang Jisok, his most trusted advisor, the man who had been at Dojin's side since they were teenage runners in Mapogu, the man whose word Dojin treated as scripture, and the man who had manufactured every single piece of evidence on that table. But Dojin didn't know that. Not yet. Not for a long time. "I'm asking you to listen to me," Saren whispered. "Just once. Just this one time. Listen." He turned, and the look in his eyes. God, that look. It wasn't anger. It was something worse. It was disappointment so deep it had turned into disgust. "I gave you everything." "You gave me walls," she said. "You gave me rules and security details and silence, and I stayed through all of it because I—" "Sign the papers." He placed them on the table, a pen beside them, and walked to the window again. She looked at the documents. 3 pages. Legal language, clinical, final. Her hand moved to her stomach, a gesture so small, so instinctive, that she didn't even realize she'd done it. She'd been nauseous for 6 days. She thought it was stress. She thought it was heartbreak manifesting physically. She didn't yet know what it really was. She signed, and when the door closed behind her that night, when the elevator descended 42 floors and released her into a soul winter that bit through her coat, she made a phone call. Not to a friend, not to family, to a clinic. And the next morning, a doctor's voice said 4 words that rearranged every molecule of her existence. "You're carrying multiples." But the real question isn't what she felt in that moment. It's what she decided to do next, and why that decision would eventually bring her back into the one place she should have never returned to. What followed was not a recovery. It was a war fought in silence. With no weapons except willpower, Saren disappeared completely. She changed her phone number, closed her bank account. The one Dojin's legal team hadn't already frozen. Moved to a 1-room apartment in Gwanak-gu, the kind of neighborhood where nobody asks questions because everybody has their own. She left behind everything that connected her to the Kang name. Every designer bag, every piece of jewelry, every photograph. She kept one thing, a handwritten recipe card for doenjang jjigae in Dojin's mother's handwriting. Not for him, for the woman who had written it, who had pressed it into her hands one Chuseok and said, "This is how we feed the people we love." She kept it tucked in a paperback novel she carried everywhere, proof that she had once belonged to something. She worked 3 jobs in her first trimester, cashier at a convenience store from 6 to noon, standing for 6 hours straight while morning sickness rolled through her in waves she couldn't show. Data entry for a small logistics firm in the afternoon, hunched over a keyboard in a basement office with no windows and no ventilation. And twice a week, she cleaned offices in Uedo, bent over desks and bathroom sinks while carrying 3 lives inside her. Her landlord once knocked to collect rent and found her sitting on the kitchen floor, eating cold rice with soy sauce, too exhausted to stand. He didn't say anything. He adjusted the payment date by a week. That was the closest thing to kindness she received from the outside world in those months. 3. Not 1. Not twins. Triplets. 2 boys and a girl. Diagnosed at 14 weeks. High-risk pregnancy from day 1. The doctor who delivered the news, a young woman with tired eyes and a gentle voice, had paused before speaking. "Do you have support at home?" Saren had looked at her with an expression the doctor would remember for years. "I am the support," she said. And the doctor had nodded slowly, as if she understood that some sentences don't need follow-up questions. She had no prenatal support system, no partner holding her hand at ultrasounds, no mother-in-law preparing seaweed soup. She sat in clinic waiting rooms alone, filling out forms that asked for an emergency contact and writing none. Let me ask you something, and I mean this. If you were Saren, carrying triplets from a man who destroyed you based on a lie, would you have told him, even knowing he might take the children, or would you have stayed silent to protect them? Drop your answer in the comments. I'll be reading every single one. She chose silence, not out of spite, not out of revenge, out of math. She calculated the odds. A Mafia boss discovering he had 3 biological children would trigger a custody war she could never win. His lawyers would bury her. His power would erase her. And her children, would grow up inside a world of bulletproof glass and monitored affection. So she vanished deeper. She gave birth at 34 weeks in a public hospital in Ansan, emergency C-section, alone. The fluorescent lights in the operating room buzzed with a frequency that would live in her memory forever. When the first cry filled the room, then the second, then the third, rapid, overlapping, desperate, she wept. Not from joy, not from pain, from the sheer, overwhelming mathematics of being one person responsible for 3. The nurses asked about the father. She said he was dead. In a way, he was. The version of him she had loved, the one who used to press his forehead against hers at 2 a.m. and whisper that she was the only thing he'd never try to control. That man had died on November 14th. There was a moment, 3 days after the birth, in the blue half-light of the recovery ward, when she held all 3 of them at once for the first time. A nurse had helped arrange them across her chest. They weighed almost nothing individually, but together the warmth of them was enormous. And Saren had made a promise. Not out loud, not to God, not to the universe, to herself. "I will never let anyone make you feel like you were unwanted. You were the most wanted thing in my life. I just couldn't want your father anymore." After the birth, she needed income, real, stable income. And that's when a staffing agency offered her a position, a live-in domestic role, Gangnam estate, high pay, private quarters with enough space for, and here's the cruel poetry of fate, a small family. She didn't know whose house it was. Not at first. By the time she found out, she had already moved the children in, already set up the cribs in the East Wing staff quarters, already built a fragile, functioning life inside the walls of her replacement's home, and she made one more decision. The hardest one. Stay. Stay hidden. Stay employed. Stay alive. Because leaving meant starting over with nothing. Again. With 3 infants. So Yoon Serin buttoned her uniform every morning, pinned her hair back, and served tea to the woman who had taken her place. And she did it without a single crack in her mask. Until tonight. Because tonight, the man she had erased from her future just walked through the front door. And unlike her, he was not equipped to pretend. Dojin stayed longer than he planned. Not for Nara. He barely heard her. She talked about Milan, about a yacht party in Busan, about a senator's wife who wore the wrong handbook to a charity gala. He nodded at the right intervals. He was gifted at performing attention. But his actual attention was locked on one thing, the kitchen hallway. Every sound from beyond that door was a wire pulled taut across his ribs. At 10:47 p.m., he excused himself to use the restroom. He didn't go to the restroom. He walked down the east corridor slowly, hands in his pockets. The picture of casual authority. The corridor was lined with photographs Nara had chosen. Abstract art, mostly, the kind that costs a fortune and communicates nothing. But near the end of the hall, where the decor shifted from curated to functional, he noticed something on the floor outside one of the doors. A small knitted sock. Blue. Impossibly small. The kind made for a foot that hadn't yet learned to walk. He bent down, picked it up, held it in his palm like it was a piece of evidence at a crime scene, which, in a way, it was. And then he heard it, a baby's murmur, soft, brief, coming from behind a door at the far end of the hallway. He stopped. His hand reached toward the door handle. "Sir." He turned. Saren stood 3 meters behind him, still in uniform, still expressionless, but her eyes, for the first time that evening, were fully locked onto his. And there it was, the fire, buried under 9 months of practiced emptiness, but alive and absolutely terrified. Her gaze dropped to the sock in his hand, a flicker, so fast most people would call it nothing. But Dojin had built an empire on reading flickers. "The restroom is the other direction," she said, voice level. "May I guide you back?" He studied her, the way he studied rivals across negotiation tables, looking for the crack, the tell, the thing that would give him leverage. "Do I know you?" he asked. A test, a trap, a grenade disguised as small talk. Saren didn't blink. "I don't believe so, sir. I'm new to the household." "You brew tea like someone who's done it before." Specifically, "I trained in traditional tea preparation. Gyeongju province. It's common there. Smooth, clean, not a single waver." But her left hand, the one not holding the towel she'd brought as a prop, was pressed flat against her thigh, fingers white at the knuckles. Dojin noticed. He always noticed hands. In his world, hands told the truth when mouths were paid to lie. He held the sock out to her. "Someone dropped this." She took it. Their fingers didn't touch. She made sure of that. But the distance between their hands was less than a centimeter, close enough to feel warmth, close enough to remember what touching had once meant. "Thank you, sir," she said. Nothing more. "What's your name?" he asked. "Hanjia." No hesitation, a practiced alias. "Shall I escort you back to Miss Choi?" He held her gaze for 3 more seconds. Each one felt like a year. Then he turned and walked back toward the sitting room. But something had shifted. Something tectonic. Because Kang Dojin was not a man who forgot faces. And he was certainly not a man who forgot the face of the woman who had once made him feel human. He just needed proof. And proof was something he knew exactly how to get. Saren establishes her alias and her boundary. Dojin is blocked from the East Wing. Access denied. The game begins. By 7 a.m., Dojin was seated in his Yongsan office. The real one, not the front. No windows, 3 screens, a secure line to his intelligence team. He hadn't slept. The sock was in his coat pocket. He hadn't meant to keep it. He'd handed it back. But the ghost of its weight remained in his palm like a phantom limb. "The Choi estate in Upper Gangnam. I want the full staff roster. Employment records, background verification. Every person who has worked in that house in the past 6 months." His lieutenant, Park Min-soo, didn't ask why. He never did. By noon, the file arrived. 7 staff members, gardener, cook, driver, 2 cleaners, 1 nanny, listed for part-time childcare work, employer unspecified, and 1 live-in maid, Han Jie, age 28, hired through Myeongdong Staffing Agency. No prior record, clean background, almost too clean. Dojin stared at the photo. a standard ID picture. Hair pulled back, neutral expression, and a face that, to anyone else, would look like just another worker. But to him, it looked like a wound that had never healed, pretending to be a scar. He pulled up a second image on his screen, one he had supposedly deleted months ago, but that still lived in an encrypted archive he'd never fully purged. Yoon Saren, taken at a syndicate gala 2 years ago, hair down, burgundy dress, looking at the camera with the reluctant half-smile of a woman who hated events, but attended them because the man she loved needed her there. He placed the images side by side. Same cheekbones, same distance between the eyes, same almost invisible asymmetry in the eyebrows that she'd once been self-conscious about, that he'd once kissed and called your signature. He picked up the phone. Get me the full agency file, not the summary, the original application, and pull the CCTV from the Choi residence, East Wing, last 30 days. But here's the thing nobody expected, and this is where the story turns its first real corner. Dojin wasn't the only one investigating, because 12 floors below him, in a basement office he didn't even know existed, Hwang Ji-seok had just received an alert that the boss was asking questions about the Choi mansion, and Ji Seog, the man who had built every lie that destroyed Dojin's marriage, felt the first cold fingers of exposure wrapping around his throat. He came back. Nara was delighted. She interpreted his return as progress. Courtship advancing, interest deepening. She wore a different dress, prepared a different menu, rehearsed different stories. Dojin didn't care about any of it. He cared about one thing, getting past the East Wing door. But Saren was ahead of him. She had rearranged her schedule so that her evening duties kept her exclusively in the kitchen and laundry corridor, as far from the sitting room as the mansion's layout allowed. She had also moved the children's feeding schedule earlier by 30 minutes, ensuring they would be deeply asleep before any guest's typical departure time. Contingency upon contingency, the architecture of a mother's vigilance. She was avoiding him, precisely, architecturally, so he changed the architecture. The tea from last time, he told Nara mid-dinner. I'd like it again. Same preparation, same person. Nara hesitated. I can have the cook. The maid, the quiet one. She has the technique. It wasn't a request. Nara recognized the tone. Every woman in Dojin's orbit eventually learned to distinguish between his suggestions and his commands. This was the latter. 10 minutes later, Saren entered the dining room. She carried the tray without a tremor, set the tea with surgical precision, chrysanthemum and barley, exact ratio. She'd remembered. Of course she'd remembered. The body holds what the heart tries to forget. Stay, Dojin said. One word, a command he'd never had to use with her before, because once she had never wanted to leave. Saren paused. Sir, I'd like you to pour. Nara laughed softly, confused. Dojin, the staff doesn't... It's a traditional tea service. The preparation includes the pour. He didn't look at Nara. His eyes were on Saren's hands as she lifted the pot. And here it was, the trap. Because Kang Dojin remembered one thing about Yoon Saren that no background check would ever reveal. She always poured with her right hand braced and her left pinky extended slightly. A habit from her grandmother, who had taught her the Gyeongju method, a method she had just claimed to have learned from training. If she poured the old way, she was lying about her identity. If she poured differently, she had changed. Or she was someone else entirely. Saren lifted the pot, and in that half second before the tea fell, something passed between them. A current. A recognition that neither would admit to, but both felt in the marrow of their bones. She poured. Right hand steady, left hand tucked behind the pot, hidden. She'd adapted. She knew the tell. She had killed the habit to protect the secret. Dojin's jaw flexed. She was good, better than he expected, but the fact that she knew to hide it meant she knew exactly who he was, and that meant Han Jia was a ghost. His ghost. Dojin gains closer proximity. Saren adapts but reveals that she knows she's being tested. The power dynamic tightens. Access, partially denied, but the cracks are widening. He shouldn't have been there. The dinner had ended. Nara had retired. His driver waited outside. But Dojin told Minsu to circle the block for 20 minutes, claimed he needed air, and re-entered the mansion through the garden terrace. A door he'd memorized the code to by watching Nara's fingers 3 days earlier. The east wing was quiet. Staff quarters, off limits to guests by household convention. A Korean domestic norm he understood but had never once respected when it didn't serve him. He moved through the corridor like a man who had spent his youth breaking into places far more dangerous than this. Silent, precise. And then, a cry. Small, sharp. Then a second one layered over the first. Then a third, softer, like an echo that hadn't committed. 3 distinct voices. Infants. Dojin stopped at the door. His hand touched the handle, and the door opened. From the inside, Saren stood there, hair loose for the first time. No uniform. A worn cotton shirt, dark circles carved under her eyes, a burp cloth over one shoulder. Behind her, in the dim glow of a nightlight, 3 bassinets lined the wall. The room smelled faintly of baby powder and the particular warmth that only small, sleeping bodies produce. A smell he had never encountered before, but that registered somewhere deep in his biology as important, essential, his. 3. The silence between them could have cracked glass. "You need to leave," she said. Not a whisper, not a plea, an order. Delivered with the kind of steel that comes from months of surviving alone. Whose children? His voice, barely a breath. Mine. How old? That is not your concern. How old? She held his gaze, and for the first time, something in her eyes shifted. Not fear, not anger. Something older than both. Something that looked like grief wearing armor. 2 months. The math hit him like a physical force. 9 months since the divorce. 2 months since birth. Conception. During the marriage. During the last months they were together. During the time he thought she was... "No," he said. The word fell out of him involuntarily, like a reflex against a burn. "You need to leave this hallway, sir," Saren repeated. "Or I will call the house security and you can explain to Miss Choi why you're standing outside the staff quarters at 2 a.m. A boundary, hard, impassable, drawn by a woman who had nothing left to lose and 3 reasons behind her to protect. Dojin stepped back, not because of the threat, but because, for the first time in 9 months, the world he'd carefully constructed, the narrative where he was the betrayed husband, the justified party, the one who walked away clean, had started to fracture. And fractures, in his experience, only moved in one direction. He left that hallway, but he did not sleep. Not that night. Not the night after. Because Kong Dojin had started counting. Months, weeks, days. And every number pointed to a truth he was not ready to face. "I need the original surveillance file from November 14th, the one Ji-seok compiled." Minsu hesitated. "Sir, that file was archived under Director Huang's personal seal. It requires... I don't care what it requires. Pull it." The file arrived encrypted. Dojin cracked it himself, a skill from his early years that he rarely advertised, and what he found inside rewrote everything. The photos from that night, the ones that showed Saren entering a hotel in Mapo-gu, were time-stamped. But the metadata was wrong. The original camera data showed a 12-minute discrepancy. Someone had altered the timestamps to align with a fabricated check-in record. The hotel booking, the one under Saren's name, had been made from an IP address traced to a device registered to the Kang Syndicate's administrative office, Jisok's office, and the man Saren was allegedly meeting? A mid-level associate named Gong Tae-yun, who, according to a buried HR memo, had been transferred to Busan 3 days before the alleged meeting. He wasn't even in Seoul that night. Dojin sat in the dark for a long time. The world didn't spin. It didn't crash. It simply rearranged, quietly, completely. Like discovering that the floor you've been standing on was never the ground. It was a ceiling, and you've been upside down all along. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a photo album he had archived, not deleted, archived, labeled only with a date. Inside, 23 photographs. Saren laughing on a bridge in Jeonju. Saren asleep in the car on the way home from his mother's house. Saren holding a persimmon she'd picked from the tree in Andong, holding it up like a trophy, her nose red from the cold. He'd taken that one himself. He remembered her saying, "Don't you dare send that to anyone." He'd said, "It's just for me." And she'd smiled. Not the practice smile she wore for events, but the real one, the one that bunched her cheeks and made her eyes nearly disappear. He closed the phone, and something cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically. The way ice cracks in spring. Slow, deep, and irreversible. He had destroyed his marriage based on fabricated evidence. He had thrown away the only woman who had ever looked past the empire to see the man, and his most trusted advisor, the man who stood beside him for 17 years, had engineered all of it. But here's what you need to understand about Kang Dojin. And this is the part that separates him from every other man in this story. He did not explode. He did not call Jiseok. He did not send men. He did not flip a table or shatter glass or do any of the things that rage demands. He closed the file. He straightened his tie. And he began to plan. Because in his world, revenge was not an emotion. It was an operation. Core revelation unlocked. The divorce was a setup. Jiseok is exposed to the audience. Dojin's transformation from cold authority to reckoning begins. But the emotional cost is just starting to register. He arranged the meeting through Nara, a calculated move. A dinner for Nara's household staff as a gesture of appreciation. Korean etiquette demanded that Saren attend. Refusing a patron's invitation would dishonor the household. Saren came. In a modest hanbok, not the uniform, not the disguise, a deep navy traditional dress that made her look like the woman she used to be, the woman he had dressed in designer gowns for syndicate galas. The woman who had once sat beside his mother during Chuseok and served tteokguk with the grace of someone who understood that in Korean families, respect was poured, not spoken. His mother. The thought hit him unexpectedly. His mother had loved Saren, had taught her the family-specific way of folding John during Seolal. The Kong family fold, 3 precise creases, a tradition passed down from Dojin's grandmother in Andong. Saren had learned it in one afternoon. His own sister had never bothered. His mother had called Saren the only good decision that boy ever made, had wept when the divorce was announced, had refused to attend the signing, had worn white for a week, not funeral white, but the white of a woman in mourning for something that should have lived. And he had told his mother that Saren was unfaithful, had watched his mother's face collapse, not in anger, but in the specific Korean pain of a mother who raised her son to be better than this and is now watching him prove her wrong, had used his own mother's pain as fuel to justify his cruelty. That realization, sitting in a private room with cedar walls and the scent of doenjang jjigae, nearly unmade him. He thought about calling her, his mother, thought about saying the words. But how do you call the woman who gave you life and tell her that you destroyed something she loved because you trusted the wrong voice? How do you say, Yama, you were right, when the cost of being right is 3 grandchildren she doesn't know exist? He wasn't ready, not yet. But the weight of that future phone call settled onto his shoulders like a second gravity. You're quiet tonight, Nara observed. I'm listening, he said. And for once it was true. Across the table, Saren ate with careful precision. She interacted with the other staff. She thanked the servers. She used both hands when receiving her glass, the proper Korean gesture of respect. And she did not look at him once. But when the evening ended and the staff were escorted to the van, Dojin intercepted her at the garden gate. I know, he said. 2 words. No context. No explanation. Saren's step faltered. The first uncontrolled movement he'd seen from her. I don't understand what you... I know that Hanjia doesn't exist. I know about the East Wing. And I'm starting to understand what I did to you. Silence. The kind that lives between people who once shared a bed and now share nothing but wreckage. Understanding isn't enough, she said quietly. Understanding is free. It costs you nothing. Then tell me what costs something? She looked at him. Fully, finally, the mask slipping for just a moment. And what he saw underneath wasn't anger. It wasn't hope. It was exhaustion. The bone-deep kind that comes from fighting a war no one knows you're in. Leave me alone, Dojin. That's what costs something. Leave me and my children alone. She walked away. And for the first time in Kang Dojin's life, a woman walked away from him and he felt the loss not as an insult to his authority, but as a wound he deserved. But leaving her alone was something Kang Dojin was no longer capable of doing, not because of pride, not because of possession, but because a very dangerous man named Hwang Ji-seok had just discovered that the woman he'd worked so hard to erase was back. And this time, she wasn't alone. Hwang Ji-seok was not a foolish man. Cruel, yes. Calculating, absolutely. But never foolish. He had spent 17 years building his position, not beside Dojin, but beneath him, in the crawl space where real power hides. He controlled information flow. He vetted personnel. He decided what reached the boss's desk and what disappeared into shredders. The marriage had been a problem. Saren made Dojin softer, more cautious, more interested in legitimizing the syndicate's operations, moving into legal business, reducing risk. And for a man like Ji-seok, whose entire value depended on the chaos of the underworld, a domesticated boss was a diminished one. He remembered the night Dojin had come back from Andong, from the Chuseok visit where Saren had cooked with his mother, where the family had sat around the table laughing in a way that sounded foreign to the syndicate men waiting outside. Dojin had been different that week. He'd talked about pension funds, healthcare acquisitions, things that had no place in Ji-seok's version of the future. That was the week Ji-seok started building the file, so he had removed her, surgically, elegantly, with photographs and timestamps and the wounded performance of a loyal friend delivering terrible news. But now, the archived file had been accessed. Dojin's digital fingerprint was all over it, and the CCTV request for the Choi mansion meant he'd found her. Ji-seok made 2 calls that night. The first was to a contact inside Nara's household, a gardener on his payroll, to confirm the presence of children in the East Wing. The second was to a family court attorney. If a woman has children and no legal paternity is established, Jisiok asked, and evidence suggests she is an unfit mother, unstable employment, no permanent address, association with criminal elements, how quickly can emergency custody be transferred? The attorney paused. With the right judge, 72 hours. Jisiok smiled. It was the kind of smile that never reached his eyes because his eyes had never learned how. His plan was clean: expose the children's existence publicly, frame Serene as an unfit mother hiding in a crime-adjacent household, trigger a custody battle, and use the chaos to reassert his control over Dojin, who would be too emotionally compromised to lead effectively. And if Dojin still resisted, there was always the nuclear option. Tell the rival families that Kang Dojin had unprotected heirs. 3 of them, vulnerable, unguarded. In the Mafia world, children were not just family, they were leverage. Jisiok gave himself 1 week to execute. But what he didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Saren had built her own intelligence network, small, quiet, made of women exactly like her. Women who had been discarded by powerful men and had learned to watch from the margins. And they had already started watching him. This time she let him in, not because he asked, not because he demanded, but because he did something he had never done before in their entire relationship. He knocked, and then he waited. When she opened the door, he was standing with his hands visible. No phone, no file, no weapon of emotional warfare. Just him, in a dark coat, rain still on his shoulders because he'd walked from the gate instead of driving to the door. "I'm not here as your employer's guest," he said, "and I'm not here as anyone's boss. I'm here as the man who failed you. And I would like, if you'll allow it, to see my children." She studied him for a long time, looking for the performance, the strategy, the angle. Because Kang Dojin always had an angle. But what she saw instead, and this scared her more than any threat, was a man standing in the rain who looked exactly the way she had looked in that hospital room in Ansan, alone, terrified, and trying. She stepped aside. The room was small, clean, warm in a way that expensive houses never are. Warm from presence, not heating. 3 bassinets against the wall, a mobile with paper cranes turning slowly above them. She had folded each one herself during the 3rd trimester, fingers swollen, sitting on the floor of the Guanak apartment at 2 a.m. because sleep had become a stranger and her hands needed something to do besides tremble. A stack of folded blankets with mismatched patterns, bought from discount markets. Dojin approached the first bassinet. Inside, a boy slept with his fist curled near his mouth. The second, another boy, slightly smaller, breathing with the rhythm of someone deeply at peace. The third, a girl, the smallest of the 3, with a tuft of dark hair and a face that looked unmistakably, undeniably like his mother. Like his mother. His jaw trembled. Just once. A micro movement that most people would miss. But Saren didn't miss it. She had spent 3 years reading that jaw. Their names? His voice was barely functional. The eldest is Yoon Hajun. The second is Yoon Minjae. The girl is Yoon Hana. Yoon. Her family name. Not Kang. He understood. He didn't argue. He had no right to. They're healthy. They're strong. And you? Are you? He stopped, swallowed, started again. I read the file, Saren, the real one. I know what Jisiok did. I know the photos were fabricated. I know the hotel record was planted. I know you were never in that room, and I know the man you were accused of meeting wasn't even in the city. Pause. I know I divorced an innocent woman because I trusted the wrong man. And I know that if I had listened to you for 5 minutes that night, none of this would have happened. He turned to face her. And this is the moment that matters. Not the power, not the empire, not the strategy. I am sorry. I am sorry in a way I don't have the vocabulary for. And I understand that my apology doesn't fix anything. It doesn't give you back the months you spent alone. It doesn't erase the hospital. It doesn't change that you raised 3 children in a maid's room while I sat in a penthouse feeling justified. His voice broke on the last word. A clean fracture. No performance. No audience. No camera in his mind. Just a man, standing in a room too small for his frame, speaking to the woman too strong for his understanding. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he said. I'm asking you to let me earn the right to try. Saren looked at him for a long, measured, devastating moment. Earning, she said, starts tomorrow at 6 a.m. That's when Minjae needs his first feed. Hajun sleeps through it, but Hana wakes up screaming and won't stop until she's walked. And the formula has to be exactly 37 degrees, or they all reject it. She handed him a burp cloth. Welcome to my world, Kang Dojin. No smile, no warmth. Just a door cracked open exactly wide enough for one man to prove that he could be something other than what he'd been. Full commitment test begins. Not grand gestures, not financial rescue. 6 a.m. formula, burp cloths, parenthood, the hardest negotiation of his life. When Kang Dojin dismantled Hwang Ji-seok, he did it the way he did everything. Systematically, efficiently, and without raising his voice once. He called a meeting of the syndicate's inner council. 12 men who controlled the operational arms of the organization. He presented the evidence, calmly, methodically. The altered timestamps, the fabricated hotel records, the IP traces, the buried transfer memo. He did not mention Saren. He did not mention the children. He framed the betrayal purely as an operational security breach. Because in this room, personal pain was a liability, and structural failure was grounds for termination. Ji-seok sat at the table, watching his life's work collapse in real time. His face transitioned through denial, calculation, and finally the cold recognition that he had no exit. You manipulated intelligence to influence a personal decision of the head of this organization, Dojin said. That constitutes a breach of the Command Trust Clause, Articles 6 and 9. Legal language, organizational language, the kind Ji-seok himself had helped write. Your operational access is revoked. Your financial portfolio within the syndicate is frozen pending audit, and your seat at this table is permanently vacated. No violence, no theatrics, just a door closing with architectural finality. Ji-seok stood, buttoned his jacket, and paused at the door. She'll break you, he said quietly. She already did once. Dojin didn't look up from the documents. No, he said. You did. She just survived it. Ji-seok's eyes flickered, a micro-expression, gone in a heartbeat. But in that fraction of a second, every man at that table saw it. Not remorse, but recalculation. The look of a strategist losing a position and already mapping the next board. The door closed, and 12 men in that room watched something they had never seen before, Kang Dojin's hands resting on the table, perfectly still, not gripping, not commanding, just still. As if the war was over, as if the real work, the quiet, unglamorous 6 a.m. formula kind of work, was finally about to begin. But Ji-suk's removal didn't erase his final move. Because 3 days before the meeting, he had already sent the files, the children's existence, Saren's location, the mansion's address, to 2 rival families, and by the time Dojin discovered this, the information was already in hands that didn't negotiate. Dojin arrived at 5:47 a.m., 13 minutes early, dressed in a black t-shirt. No suit, no watch, no rings. He carried a bag from a 24-hour pharmacy, formula, diapers, size 1, the brand Saren's notes specified. Yes, she had left notes. And a small heating device to measure milk temperature precisely. Saren opened the door, looked at the bag, looked at him. 37 degrees, she said. 37, he confirmed. And for the first time in 9 months, they existed in the same room with their children between them, not as enemies, not as lovers, not as anything with a name, just as 2 people trying to keep 3 tiny hearts beating. He fumbled the first bottle, held Hana too high, startled when Minji spit up on his shoulder, and at one point Hajun grabbed his index finger with a grip so strong that Dojin looked at Saren with an expression that could only be described as stunned. "He does that," she said. "He's strong. He's yours." The room went quiet. Not the tense quiet of before, a different kind. The kind that exists in the space between ruin and repair, where 2 people haven't forgiven each other yet but have agreed, silently, carefully, to stop destroying what's left. At 7:15, all 3 babies were asleep. Dojin sat on the floor with his back against the wall, a burp cloth still over his shoulder, his eyes closed. Saren sat across from him, legs folded, her head resting against the edge of Hana's bassinet. For a moment they looked like any 2 exhausted parents in any small room in any city in the world. The empire, the syndicate, the lies, the wreckage. All of it shrank to the size of this room and these 3 sleeping breaths. Saren. I'm going to protect this. All of it. The children, you, this room, whatever this becomes. He opened his eyes. But I need you to know, there are people who now know they exist, and I need time to build the wall before they get close. She looked at him steadily. How much time? Give me 3 weeks. You have 10 days. He almost smiled. Almost. You always negotiated harder than anyone in my organization. I had better reasons. He stood, walked to the door, and paused. The same doorway where, days ago, she had blocked him with a stranger's voice and a maid's posture. I won't let anyone touch them, he said. Or you. I need you to believe that. I don't believe promises, Dojin. I believe patterns. Show me 10 days of pattern, and we'll talk about belief. He nodded, and walked out into a Seoul dawn that was just beginning to turn gold over the rooftops of Gangnam, carrying the weight of an empire on one shoulder and a burp cloth on the other. His driver, waiting by the car, looked at the cloth and said nothing. Min-soo, standing by the gate, looked at his boss's face, softer than he'd ever seen it, unguarded in a way that would have been dangerous in any other context, and also said nothing. Some things didn't need words. They just needed witnesses. For the first time in his life, the burp cloth felt heavier. The boss who commanded rooms now takes orders from a woman with a burp cloth. Access level, earned, conditional, and more valuable than any territory he's ever controlled. So here is where we leave them. Not at the end, not at the beginning. Somewhere in the trembling middle where nothing is fixed and everything is possible. A mansion in Gangnam holds 3 sleeping children who don't know their father just walked back into their lives with formula and terror and a willingness to be humbled. A woman who survived 9 months of invisible war now faces something harder than survival. The possibility that the man who destroyed her might actually be capable of change. A man who once believed that control was the same thing as love is beginning to understand that real power, the kind that matters, the kind that lasts, doesn't come from territory or fear or syndicate loyalty. It comes from a 6 a.m. alarm, a 37-degree bottle, and the courage to stand in a room where you are not the most important person and be grateful for it. But the truth? The full truth? It's still locked inside that mansion, behind silence, behind walls, behind 9 months of pain that hasn't finished speaking yet. And somewhere in this city, 2 rival families now have an address. Jisuk's parting gift is already in motion. The wall Dojin promised to build? He has 10 days. And the woman who gave him that deadline? She's already preparing for the possibility that he'll fail, because Yoon Saren stopped believing in rescue the night she signed those papers. What she believes in now is simpler, harder, and more unbreakable. Herself. If this story grabbed you by the chest and hasn't let go, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Subscribe to Aurora Love Saga and hit that notification bell. Because this story, it's only the beginning. Drop a comment below and tell me, should Saren give Dojin those 10 days? Or should she disappear again, this time for good? Your voice matters in this story. I'll see you in the next chapter.